The war was not supposed to reach her mountain range. The frost-crowned peaks had stood untouched for thousands of years, hidden beneath layers of ancient snow and guarded by fierce wind spirits. But today, something cracked through the icy silence. It wasn't just a sound. It was a tremor in the air, a sharp pressure that made her heart pound inside her blue chest. Zinara, princess of the glacials, stood at the edge of a frozen cliff. Her long silver hair flowed wildly in the screaming wind, and her glowing amber eyes narrowed. She wore armor carved from glacier bones, and wrapped herself in a great fur cloak. Below her, black ships cut through the clouds. Red lights blinked. On their wings, the humans had arrived. But not the ones who spoke in peace. These ones came armed with drills and fire. She clenched her fists. Their war had nothing to do with her people. Her kind had already been exiled from the warm galaxy. Now they would be hunted even in the coldest corner of the universe. As one of the last daughters of the Frost Empress, Zinara had been told to survive. But she had never been told how to survive when the sky itself was falling. She turned away from the cliff and ran back toward the icy cave systems. Behind her, a sharp crack echoed. Something hot lit up the clouds. A burning trail fell toward the earth like a star falling to its death. It wasn't a weapon. It was a small escape pod. It crashed somewhere nearby, carving a trail in the snow like a comet on fire. Zinara hid for hours, moving through tunnels shaped by her ancestors. She avoided the drones scanning for life. She crushed one with a falling icicle when it got too close, but the cold was growing worse, not natural cold. Something deeper. Her body was built to withstand sub-zero storms, yet her limbs felt heavy. Her breath slowed, her thoughts blurred. She stumbled and collapsed inside a hollow chamber where the walls glowed faintly with old runes. She thought the cold would kill her. It would have been an honorable end. Not from fire or steel, but from the element that had shaped her entire bloodline. She closed her eyes and waited for sleep to take her. She whispered the ancient words of farewell. But instead of silence, she heard something else. Footsteps. Crunching snow. Then a voice that did not belong to any starborn creature she knew. "Don't sleep. You'll freeze for good," the human said. Her vision was blurry, but she saw a figure kneel beside her. He was wrapped in strange fabrics, thick and warm, and carried a burning light in his hand. It wasn't plasma, it was old fire, real fire. She hadn't seen it since childhood stories. He pressed a warm cloth to her face and slipped something under her tongue. It melted fast and burned her throat in a strange, comforting way. "Who are you?" she whispered, barely able to move her lips. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took off his jacket and wrapped it around her. The heat was sharp and wild. It stung her skin. She gasped and shivered and tried to move away. But he held her steady, his hands not forceful, just firm. "My pod crashed nearby. I saw you fall. I followed your trail. Thought I'd find an animal, or maybe a corpse. Not a warrior queen with glowing eyes," he said with a quiet laugh. She blinked slowly. Her breath returned. Not fully, but enough to think. Enough to feel heat spreading through her body. It wasn't the fire alone. It was him. The human. His skin radiated warmth she didn't understand. He was not like the soldiers she had fought before. He didn't speak with fear or anger. He spoke with strange calm. Like he was used to cold places. Like he didn't care if he lived or died. "You should not be here," she said. He looked into her eyes, then nodded. "Neither should you." "But here we are," he replied. In that moment, surrounded by ice and shadows, Zinara realized she wasn't dying anymore. The cold inside her chest had stopped spreading. Her fingers twitched. Her lungs filled deeper. Her heartbeat picked up. She didn't trust him, but she no longer feared the end. His touch was fire. Zinara sat by the fire he had built from broken cave wood and dried cave moss. She watched the flames dance, unsure if they were real or some dream created by her half-frozen mind. The fire gave off a soft crackling sound and painted gold on her pale blue skin. Her hair hung wet from melting snow, strands clinging to her cheeks. She had not felt this warmth in decades. The human stirred the flames with a stick and looked up at her. His face was covered in frost and beard, but his eyes were sharp and alive. He did not stare at her like a curious scientist or a frightened soldier. He looked at her like she was just another survivor. His presence was steady, like a fire that knew it had to last through the night. She kept her distance at first, crouching at the edge of the light. Her kind were known to freeze or strike when startled. But her body was no longer shaking. Her blood was moving again. She looked at her fingers, surprised they still worked. The human had saved her. Not with weapons or ships, but with a fire. And a single act of defiance against the cold. "You're not what I expected," he said as he handed her a chunk of thawed ration. It smelled terrible but held heat in it. She sniffed it like an animal, then bit off a piece. Her face winced, but she ate it all. He chuckled and shook his head. "Yeah, it's awful. But it keeps you breathing," he added. She finally asked. His name, he told her it was Darren. A short name, strong on the tongue. She repeated it a few times in her native accent, then nodded. "You are strange, Darren. No weapon, no armor. No fear," she said. He only smiled and replied, "Fear comes later. Right now I'm focused on staying warm." Night fell harder than expected. The storm outside screamed like the mountain itself was in pain. Snow buried the entrance of the cave. The wind carried the scent of burning metal. Drones were still searching. He had sealed the cave tight with snow and heat packs. The temperature dropped sharply, but the fire kept the cave alive. Zinara moved closer to the flames. Her skin felt raw, but the heat no longer stung. Darren had taken off his gloves and rubbed warmth into her hands earlier. It shocked her, the way his touch had burned without pain. Her body was made to resist cold, yet his fingers had woken. Something buried deep under layers of frost. She found herself watching him too closely. The way he spoke to the fire. The way he talked to himself while fixing wires and rationing heat cells. He had no reason to help her, yet he did. She tried to understand his logic. He was not her enemy, but he was still human. She could not forget what his kind had done to her world. "You should have left me to die," she said. "I don't leave people behind," he replied without looking at her. Those words sat heavy in her mind. Her own people had left her behind in the ice. Her commanders had vanished with the elders. No one had come back for her. Only this strange, fire-bearing human had walked into the storm just to find her. She did not know whether to thank him or fear him. When she closed her eyes, she expected the darkness to return. But it didn't. The glow of the fire stayed in her vision. She heard his breathing, steady and calm. She felt safe. A word she hadn't thought about in years. Darren had done something no glacial warrior ever could. He had made her want to live again. "I owe you," she whispered. He looked up, confused, then waved her off. "You don't owe me anything. Just don't freeze on me." "That's enough," he said with a grin. That night, as the blizzard raged, and the world outside turned white and deadly, the fire inside the cave burned on. Two strangers, one born of ice and one born of flame, shared silence between flickers of light and shadows on the walls. Neither knew what the next day would bring. But for now, they were alive, and for the first time in a long time, Zinara believed that was enough. When Zinara woke, the storm outside had slowed. The light filtering through the snow-sealed entrance had a pale glow. She blinked away frost from her lashes and sat up slowly. Darren was already awake, crouched beside the fire with a small tool in hand. He was fixing something that sparked and buzzed in the flame's light. "Your gear is damaged," she said without emotion. Everything I own got wrecked when the pod hit the cliff. I'm just making it worse in a smarter way, he answered. She stared at his work, confused by how calmly he acted in such danger. He had no radio, no contact, no ship. He was stranded in the most frozen part of the galaxy with a dying fire. And a wounded alien woman. Yet he hummed while he worked and even cracked small jokes when wires shocked his fingers. Zenara pulled the fur cloak tighter around her shoulders. Her body was healing faster than expected. Perhaps the fire had helped. Perhaps his warmth had done more than she knew. She watched his hands move, not like a warrior but like a builder. She found herself wondering what kind of world he came from. He noticed her watching. "You ever fix something just to feel useful?" he asked. "No, my people are trained to destroy, not repair," she replied without hesitation. "Well, that's a shame," he said, not mocking, just honest. Silence grew between them again. It was not uncomfortable. It was strange, like the snow around them had swallowed all sound but kept meaning alive. She could hear his breath. She could hear her own. She realized their heartbeats were not far apart in rhythm. That thought unsettled her more than the war outside. A loud crash echoed far above. Ice cracked, metal whined. Darren jumped to his feet. Zenara rose beside him. The noise was familiar. It was not part of nature. A dropship had landed nearby. Its weight had crushed part of the upper cliff. Drones would soon be crawling the ground, scanning for survivors or threats. "We need to move," she said quickly. "I agree, but we're low on heat packs." "Can you walk far?" he asked. She nodded. "Far enough. I know these tunnels." "We won't be found if we go west," she added. He gathered what little he had. One pack, one tool set. The fire was dying. He didn't try to save it. He looked at it once, with tired eyes, then turned away. Zenara stepped toward the cave wall and pressed her palm to a smooth slab of ice. A hidden path opened as the wall cracked and rolled aside. Together, they entered the tunnel. It closed behind them like the mouth of a beast. The light was faint. Darren's torch flickered, then held steady. They moved side by side, close but not touching. Zenara led with confidence. She remembered the old routes, the ones used by hunters before the exile. They walked for nearly an hour. Neither spoke much. The only sound was their steps and the distant hum of scanners overhead. At last they came to a narrow chamber lit by glowing frost crystals. Zenara slumped to the ground and leaned back. Darren sat across from her, breathing heavily. "Why do you help me?" she asked after a long pause. He looked up at her. "You were dying. I couldn't just leave you," he said simply. "But I'm not human." "I'm your enemy," she reminded him. "Maybe, but not right now." "Right now we're just two people trying not to die," he said as he offered her a piece of ration. She took it without a word. Her mind spun. His answers made no sense to her warrior brain. But something inside her accepted them. Maybe survival made old rules feel smaller. Maybe she had already changed without knowing it. "You could have killed me in my sleep. That would have been easier," she said. "I'm not looking for easy," he replied. For a long time they sat in silence. She closed her eyes and listened to the low crackle of energy from his torch. Her body was tired, but no longer frozen. Her thoughts were sharper now, clearer. One question echoed louder than all others. What would become of them if they kept moving together? She opened her eyes and looked at him across the glowing chamber. She didn't feel alone anymore. The tunnels grew tighter as they moved deeper. Zenara had to crouch at points, and Darren's shoulder scraped against icy walls. The temperature dropped again, but not like before. It was manageable. The fire inside her chest still pulsed, not from heat packs or crystals. It was something else now, something she didn't fully understand. They reached a fork in the path. Zenara paused, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She ran her fingers along the wall, reading symbols etched centuries ago. "This way leads to the old Watchers' chamber," she whispered. "It's far from the surface. No scanners will reach there," she added without turning. Darren nodded and followed. He didn't ask how she knew. He didn't question the symbols. He trusted her lead. It surprised her how much that meant. Trust was rare between species, especially during war. But his silence said more than any oath. He walked with her like they were equals, not enemies. When they reached the chamber, the air was still and heavy. Massive stone-like columns stretched from floor to ceiling. The walls shimmered with ancient frost runes. In the center, a low platform held old tech covered in crystal dust. Zenara stepped forward and wiped the surface clean with her sleeve. "This was where the glacial Watchers met during the Old Age," she said softly. "Any power left in it?" Darren asked as he scanned the platform with a broken wrist device. "Maybe," she replied, "but it won't help us escape. This is a grave. Now, not a gateway." They set up camp again, using what little they had. Darren placed 2 tiny heating cells under a thin metal plate and sat close to it. Zenara wrapped herself in her fur cloak and leaned against one of the pillars. The silence was different now, not fearful, not frozen. It felt like rest. After a few minutes, Darren spoke. "What will your people do if they find us together?" he asked. "They will assume you captured me, or that I lost my mind," she answered. "And what would you do if they took me?" he asked again. "I don't know," she said quietly. Darren didn't press further. He only nodded and leaned back. His eyes drifted to the ceiling where frost lines looked like falling stars. He exhaled slowly and smiled at the shapes. "My brother used to trace stars like that. Said they told stories if you watched long enough," he said with a warm voice. "Do you have family?" Zenara asked. "Had," he replied. "They're gone. One died in training. The others in orbit when the war began." I stopped counting after the third name was read out. Zenara lowered her eyes. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't know how. Her people honored silence more than sympathy. But something inside her stirred, a weight she had buried long ago. Her sister had vanished during the first raid. Her father frozen by enemy pulse. She had not said their names in years. I also stopped counting, she said. They sat quietly again, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the heating cell. Outside the chamber, no wind reached them, no machines moved. It was like the world had paused. A short gift of peace stolen from the chaos above. "I keep thinking about the fire," Zenara said after some time. "What about it?" Darren asked. "It wasn't just heat. It felt alive. Like it was trying to wake something in me," she said as her fingers tightened around her own wrist. "Maybe it did," he replied. Their eyes met across the small glow. No sparks flew, no music played, but something shifted. The war outside faded just a little more. In that moment, neither felt like soldier or survivor, just people. Alone together in the last warmth they had left. Zenara stood and walked toward the platform. She traced the carvings again slowly. "There's a path beyond this place. A hidden route that leads to the lower glacier belt," she said. "Safer than staying here?" Darren asked. "No," she said. "But it's where my people hide when hunted. If we're lucky, no one will follow." He stood, stretched his back, and gathered his tools again. "We move at dawn," she said. Darren nodded without hesitation. They both knew the path ahead would be colder, darker, and possibly deadly. But neither of them hesitated. Not anymore. They left the Watcher's chamber before the sun reached the far side of the peaks. The sky was still dim, and the crystals in the ice cast soft shadows along the tunnel walls. Zenara moved in silence, her steps light but purposeful. Darren followed. Behind, his pack tightened and breath fogging the air. The hidden path was narrow and frozen, winding between old support columns and jagged ice spikes. Darren slipped once but caught himself. Zenara looked back with a faint smile. He grinned through his teeth, brushing snow from his sleeve. "You walk like the ground owes you something," he said with a shiver. Zenara tilted her head slightly. "The mountain remembers us. That's why it carries my steps," she replied. They pushed forward deeper into ancient tunnels that hadn't seen light in generations. Somewhere above them, the war continued. Explosions echoed faintly through, the ice dull and far away. But here, under layers of silence and frost, the air felt untouched. It was a strange kind of peace neither of them trusted. They paused near a fractured ice bridge. It hung over a narrow chasm where cold mist curled like breath from a buried beast. Zenara tested the edge with her foot and nodded. "One at a time, slowly. Don't look down," she instructed. Darren stepped forward with caution. His boots crunched over thin frost. The bridge creaked but held. Halfway across, he looked up and said, "You're sure this thing won't collapse?" With a nervous laugh. "No," she said simply. He made it to the other side and exhaled hard. Zenara followed, lighter on her feet, graceful even in the cold. When she reached him, he looked back at the bridge and shook his head. "You trust ice more than I do," he muttered. "I trust what was built by hands that knew fear," she answered. The tunnel beyond the bridge opened into a small chamber lined with carvings. Zenara stopped and ran her fingers over the frozen stone. "This is a message wall," she said. "When glacials fled the Empire, they left stories in places like this." Darren stepped closer. "Can you read them?" he asked. "Yes. This one speaks of a traitor who lit fire inside a sacred place. They called her cursed, but it says here she survived. Lived alone in the mountain for 100 seasons. The fire did not kill her. It changed her," Zenara said, her voice distant. Darren looked at her carefully. "Why do I feel like this story means something to you?" he asked. "Because I once swore to never touch fire. And now I follow a man who brought it into my hands," she said without looking at him. He didn't reply. Instead, he walked toward the far side of the chamber and cleared a space to rest. They sat for a while, sharing what little food they had. The silence between them had changed again, not from tension, from recognition. Zenara finally said, "We are approaching the lower glacier belt. If we're lucky, we'll find an outpost. If not, a cave. Either way, we must be ready to defend ourselves." Darren nodded. "I've got one heat blade left. The rest is junk," he said. "I have my claws and knowledge of the terrain," she replied. Outside the chamber, the path narrowed once more. They moved carefully, ears sharp for any shift in the air. Halfway down the next passage, Zenara stopped. Her hand flew up. Darren froze. They both listened. A faint hum drifted through the cold. Not the wind. Not nature. It was mechanical, drone. She whispered. They ducked behind a rock outcrop just as a blue scanner beam swept across the walls. The drone floated past slowly, its camera turning. Zenara reached for a shard of crystal near her boot. Darren pulled a metal shard from his pack. But the drone passed without pause. It vanished into the next tunnel like a ghost with no target. They exhaled together. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Close. Too close. The enemy was near. And time was running out. "We keep going." "But faster," Zenara said firmly. Darren nodded and followed. The cold was rising again. Not just from outside, but from inside Zenara's chest. She didn't know if it was fear or memory. But she felt it. And she knew the fire that once saved her might have to burn brighter soon. The glacier belt was darker than expected. Long sheets of ice twisted like frozen waves, forming sharp ridges and slippery ledges. Zenara led with caution, her senses stretched as far as possible. She knew this area by memory, but even memory could crack under frost in time. Darren followed close behind, scanning the cliffs for motion. His breath was shallow, eyes sharp. The drone encounter had changed something. He no longer looked at the cold as just cold. He saw it now as a silent hunter, hiding soldiers or steel under its white cloak. They moved quickly, speaking only with hand signals. Every sound echoed. Every footstep left a trail. Zenara hated being exposed like this. The open ice offered. No cover, no cave. No warmth, only distance and danger. Finally they spotted it. A faint glow behind a distant outcrop. Zenara narrowed her eyes. "Thermal beacon," she whispered. "Friendly?" Darren asked without hope. "Unlikely, but useful. If they're gone, the station might still hold supplies." She replied. They approached the site from below, climbing the jagged side of a Thea. Narrow ice face. Zenara moved fast. Darren kept pace, careful not to break the ice beneath him. When they reached the top, both dropped low and scanned the clearing. What they saw made their hearts sink. The beacon pulsed atop a collapsed outpost. Half buried in snow, the shelter had been torn open by some kind of blast. Scorch marks blackened the snow. No movement. No heat signatures. Only wreckage. "Too late," Darren said under his breath. Zenara stepped forward carefully. Inside the station's broken wall, crates of supplies lay scattered. She opened one and found heat packs, food rations, and even 2 functioning pulse cells. It wasn't much, but it was enough to live another day. She handed Darren one of the cells. "These will last through the next storm," she said. He took it with a small smile. "Sometimes scraps are miracles," he replied. They worked quickly, gathering anything they could carry. Zenara also retrieved a cum shard, a small device that could receive signals but not send them. As she powered it up, static filled the air. Then a voice broke through. Garbled, low and distorted, but real. "Scout Team 6, confirmed sighting, glacial, human ally. Capture or eliminate. High Command authorizes strike," the voice said before cutting to static again. Zenara looked at Darren. "They're tracking. US together," she said. "Not just you then." "I'm on their list too," he muttered. They both stood still for a moment, surrounded by wreckage and falling snow. The enemy didn't just want her. Now they wanted him too. Helping her had made him a target, a traitor, a threat. And he didn't even hesitate when he heard it. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "No, do you?" he answered without blinking. She shook her head slowly. A distant rumble shook the ice. Not thunder. Engines. A ship was closing in. Zenara and Darren grabbed the last of the supplies and vanished into a crack beside the ridge. The tunnel below was tight and steep. They slid down until the sound of rotors faded above them. Inside the narrow passage, the light dimmed again. Zenara lit one of the salvaged cells, casting a soft blue glow. Her eyes studied Darren's face. He looked tired but determined. She had seen warriors break under less pressure. Yet he stood beside her without fear. "You burn brighter than I expected," she said. "And you're colder than I thought." "But in a good way," he replied with a grin. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. There was no time for warmth, but it lived in the silence between them. The cold had nearly killed her, but now she walked in it, not alone. That changed everything. Further down the tunnel, the walls widened into a forgotten chamber. Ancient markings covered the floor. Zenara stopped and knelt beside them. "These speak of the Ember Pact, a moment in our history when fire and frost stood together," she whispered. "Sounds familiar," Darren said as he sat beside her. "We're repeating stories older than war," she added, "and writing our own," he said as the blue light flickered against the stone. The Ember Pact chamber echoed with silence as they moved through it. Each step seemed louder than it should have been. The markings on the ground lit faintly beneath their boots, responding to presence like memory awakening from slumber. Zenara moved slower now, not from fear, but from reverence. Darren followed, sensing the shift in her. This was no ordinary ice tunnel. There was history here. Every wall whispered fragments of the past. Some in glacial script, others in symbols older than translation. He could feel it in the air, heavy, ancient, sacred. Zinara touched a wall marked with the sign of the twin flame. It was rare among her people. A tale told only during ritual. One flame of frost, the other of fire. Together, they burned the darkness but could never touch directly. "This place remembers balance," she said softly. Darren stepped beside her and looked at the symbol. "What happens when fire and frost do touch?" he asked. "They either destroy each other or become something new," she answered without looking away. Before he could reply, a low chime rang through the air. A vibration in the stone followed. Both of them froze. Zinara stepped back quickly, pulling Darren with her. The chamber responded, as if aware of them now. A section of the far wall split open, revealing a spiral path downward. "It's opening," Darren whispered. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "Only those of mixed blood or fate can awaken this path," she said with narrowed eyes. "Then, we must be fate," he replied with a crooked smile. She didn't smile back, but she didn't argue either. They descended the spiral carefully. The air grew warmer the deeper they went. Not from fire, but from something older. A quiet pulse thrummed through the walls. Below, a round platform waited in the heart of the glacier. In its center stood a crystal pillar surrounded by broken weapons and burned banners. "This is a pact forge," Zinara said. Darren stared at the pillar. "What did they forge here?" he asked. "Bonds, between enemies, between clans, between elements. It was used once, in desperation, to create the Ember Treaty," she explained. She stepped forward and placed her palm on the crystal. A burst of light shimmered through the room, and the pillar began to glow. It didn't hurt her. It welcomed her. She turned back to Darren and held out her hand. He hesitated, then reached out and took it. The moment their hands touched, the light shifted. It wrapped around them in spirals, soft and hot, yet not painful. The weapons on the ground rattled. The banners lifted. The forge awakened. "What's happening?" Darren asked with a low voice. "The pact accepts us. Fire and frost, not as enemies. As one force," she said calmly. The light pulsed once more and faded. Their hands separated slowly. The glow remained in the air, like sparks floating through breath. The forge had done something neither of them could explain. But both of them felt changed. Zinara stepped back and bowed her head. "We are bonded by pact now, not by law, not by duty. By choice," she said. Darren nodded. "Then let's survive by that choice," he replied. Suddenly, a loud crash sounded above. The glacier shook. Ice cracked overhead. Voices shouted. The enemy had followed their trail and breached the upper tunnels. Zinara turned sharply, eyes blazing with new resolve. Darren activated the last heat blade in his pack. "They found us," she said. "Then they'll wish they hadn't," he replied. Together they ran up the spiral path, the blue and orange. Lights of the forge still flickering in their wake. The chamber behind them began to seal. The pact would sleep again. But the fire it lit inside them had only begun to burn. As they reached the surface tunnel, 3 drones dropped from above. Zinara spun mid-run and sliced through the first with an ice-tipped claw. Darren ducked and shoved his blade into the second sensor core. Sparks filled the air. The third flew up to call for backup, but was frozen mid-flight by a sharp breath. From Zinara, the moment passed in silence. Then more footsteps approached from the ridge. Darren stepped forward, shoulders squared. Zinara stood beside him, her breath forming steam in the air. They no longer ran from the storm, they had become its answer. Zinara and Darren stood at the mouth of the ice tunnel as the enemy squad came into view. Black-armored soldiers fanned out across the ridge, weapons drawn, scanners humming. They moved with purpose, unaware that the two figures they were hunting no longer planned to run. The wind howled, but the two did not flinch. Zanara stepped forward, cloak snapping behind her. Darren moved in stride with her, blade in hand, eyes locked on the threat ahead. Together, they were no longer survivor and stranger. They were something greater. The soldiers raised their rifles. "You are trespassing in a restricted zone," one of them barked. "Surrender the fugitive. The human will be processed. The glacial will be returned for judgment," he added with robotic certainty. "No," Zanara said with a voice sharp as breaking ice. Darren didn't wait. He dashed forward, low and fast, dodging a plasma bolt and slicing the nearest soldier across the leg. Zanara followed like lightning, her claws raking through armor as if it were fabric. The soldiers reeled, not prepared for what they faced. Two more tried to flank, but the air froze in their lungs before they could shoot. Zanara raised her palm and released a gust of frost that shattered their visors. Darren twisted and disarmed a third, slamming him into the snow. They moved as one, fire and ice in motion. The last soldier turned to flee and raised a beacon to call for more, but Zanara launched a spear of frozen breath that pinned him to the ground. Darren crushed the beacon underfoot and turned to her. "They'll send more," he said. "They always do," she replied. "But this time, we're not hiding," he said firmly. She nodded. "Let them come. Let them feel what they tried to bury under snow," she said as her eyes glowed brighter. They gathered what they could from the enemy. Power cells. A clean comlink. A short-range transmitter. Darren worked fast, setting up a flare that would mask their trail. Zanara mapped the nearest sanctuary point in the glacier's heart, a place her people once called the Soul Hollow. As they trekked toward it, Darren finally asked what he'd been holding back. "What happens if your people find us before theirs?" "Do," he asked. "They will see me as changed. Some may call it betrayal. Others might call it prophecy," she answered calmly. "And what will you call it?" he asked again. "I will call it truth," she replied without hesitation. They reached Soul Hollow by nightfall. It was not marked on any maps. Hidden beneath a frozen waterfall, the hollow pulsed with ancient light. Bioluminescent vines clung to the icy walls. In the center stood a monument carved by the first glacials. Zanara knelt before it and placed a shard from the Ember Forge at its base. "It will awaken them. If they still have ears to listen," she said. Darren placed a heat cell beside it. "And if they don't," he asked, "then we build something new," she answered. Together they waited in the center of the hollow. Silence wrapped around them, thick and calm. Zanara leaned against the monument while Darren stood watch. Number. Words passed. None were needed. The bond they shared said everything. A soft chime echoed through the air. The shard pulsed, sending ripples across the monument. Light climbed the walls, reaching the ceiling and spilling out through the waterfall. Above, it was a signal not just to her people, but to all who still believed in something beyond the old war. Far away, in the mountains of frost and steel, elders opened their eyes. Scouts paused mid-step. And in distant halls where judgment once ruled, whispers of the Ember Pack began to stir again. Zanara looked up, her expression unreadable. "It has begun," she said. Darren stepped beside her and touched her shoulder. "Then we finish it together," he said. The hollow burned with light and ice, casting their shadows across history's stone. They had not just survived the storm, they had become the fire at its heart.